Episode number 62, Advice for Dads. Show notes can be found at dadhackers.us/062. First off, Dad Hacker, I want to wish you a very, very happy Father's Day, and I hope that your day was blessed. I know this is coming out the day after Father's Day, but still wanted to wish you a very happy Father's Day. Now, today's show is a little different than a normal episode. Recently, Andy Murphy of the Secure Dad podcast asked me if I'd like to sit down with him and discuss several topics as it relates to fatherhood. Andy was on the show a while back, and you can listen to his episode by going to the show notes after the show. There's a link for that there. And I was very honored at the request and thought our conversation would make for an excellent Father's Day special edition episode. So here you have it. Now, what's more is that this episode actually marks the 1-year anniversary of the launch of the Dad Hackers podcast. How cool is that? A lot has happened over the past year, and we've had some excellent guests, some great interviews, some great conversations, and we've hit some great milestones. For example, during the past year, we've seen the Dad Hackers Facebook group hit the 1,000 mark. We've seen the Dad Hackers podcast cross the 15,000 download mark. That's a pretty big milestone to hit right there. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing the podcast and for just being a part of what's going on here. We also launched our Iron Men Mastermind, and we had our very first Dad Hackers t-shirt come out. A lot of you guys took advantage of that. That's no longer available, but there is new stuff in the store now if you check out the same link. Again, that's all available in the show notes. And more recently, we've actually had our largest day, our largest week, and our largest month as far as downloads go for the podcast. So things are going really well with the Dad Hackers community, and I just appreciate you so much for listening, and I appreciate everything that you do as far as sharing the episodes and engaging in the content. It's great, and that's exactly what this is for. And in the coming days and weeks and months, we'll be launching more podcast episodes each week, and we have some great guests lined up for those. And we're also developing a 4-week course for dads who want to conquer anger and frustration, get a handle on their finances, carve out more time for their family, and practice patience. So don't have any more details for you than that for that, but look for those to come out soon. All right, guys, that's enough of that for now. Here's our conversation and some advice for dads. What's up, Dad Hackers? My name is Patrick Antonucci, and I am the host and founder of this podcast and community of Dad Hackers. Now, Dad Hackers is a community of Christian fathers who are devoted to encouraging, equipping, and enabling one another to become the men that God has created and called us to be, so that we can raise up the next generation of fully devoted followers of Christ and leave a legacy of multi-generational faithfulness. Now, on this show, we primarily interview Christian men to dive deep into their experiences and insights into what it means to be a Christian man, a Christian husband, a Christian father, and a Christian leader. We ask questions that dig deep into the thinking and rationale and experiences of these men so that we can all learn and grow into the men that God is calling us to be. I'm so thankful that you've joined us today. Make sure you subscribe so that you never miss any of our value-packed episodes. Also, please make sure you leave an honest review if you're listening to this in iTunes or any other platform that takes reviews. Reviews boost the show's ratings, which means that more dads are going to come across our show and benefit from the content that we put out. I also wanted to let you know that we do have a free private Facebook group just for Christian dads. So after the show, make sure you hop on over to the show notes. There's a link for that in there as well.
Thank you for being on the show today with me, Patrick. How are you feeling today?
I'm doing pretty good, Andy. How are you, brother?
I'm doing good. I'm doing all right with this heat, and I'm trying to keep my family inside when I can. I'm sure you're probably doing the same thing.
Yeah, we were out cutting grass this morning. My son cuts. I do the weed whacking. It's nice.
Oh, man.
Team up, and it doesn't take 3 hours anymore.
That's great. Yeah, I'm waiting for as soon as my son is tall enough to use that lawnmower. I am pushing him out there.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. But I really appreciate you thinking of me to do this special edition and having me on your show. So thank you so much, Andy. I do appreciate it.
Sure, man. And I appreciate you and I appreciate Dad Hackers and your podcast. And that's why I kind of wanted to have you on to talk about fatherhood. Now, we're going to share some points that we want dads to know. And I really like the first point that you want to bring up.
Yeah, sure. One of the things that when you asked me to do this, one of the things that came immediately to mind is this whole concept that we have a finite amount of time with our kids. I mean, most of us, I mean, you think the 18-year mark, that's when they're an adult. I mean, give or take, let's just use 18. It's finite. And the thing that can happen is that as we go through the days and weeks of fatherhood, it could seem very, very long sometimes
Yes.
and very challenging. But now, like my oldest son at the time of this recording is 12 years old now.
Hmm.
I look back and I'm like, where did that time go? My wife and I, we just celebrated our 15-year anniversary. And I'm like, where did that time go?
Right.
And yeah, so the time is finite. Again, when he turned 9, a lady at work reminded me that that's halfway to 18, and I was like, "Why did you have to say that?"
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And then
That's,
I made the mistake and told my wife about that conversation, and so uh,
hmm,
she was she was pretty saddened by that fact, and
right.
that is now 3 years ago. What I want to encourage dads to do is to make the most of the time that we've been granted with them. I mean, we are all stewards of God with our children. Lots of times we think of them as our children because we helped create them, and we are responsible for their care and their protection and their upbringing. But ultimately, they are God's possessions, and we are given them in our charge for a short amount of time. And it's that time that we have to prepare them to launch into the real world as adults. I try to keep that in the back of my mind whenever I get consumed or engrossed in things. The Secure Dad takes up a lot of your time. Dad Hackers takes up a lot of my time. And it's really easy to want to keep pouring more and more time into it.
Right.
I have to be very careful and set boundaries around what I do so that it doesn't consume all of my time because you know my primary ministry is to my wife and children. It's not Dad Hackers.
Right.
Same thing for you. Your primary role is not as the Secure Dad. It's to your family. These different pursuits and things that we get involved with, and it doesn't have to be a side project or a business or ministry. It could be your job. It could be golf. It could be um, recreational activities. It could be just relaxing when you get home and watching 3 hours of Netflix. Those things can consume your time.
Hmm.
And if you're not careful and set boundaries and discipline yourself and are consistent, you could look back after 5, 10, 15 years and think, man, I I really did not steward that time well and invest it in my family and in my children the way I should. I don't want to grow up or have my children grow up, but I don't want when my children grow up for me to look back and think, man, I really messed up.
Right.
I really didn't steward well the gift that God has given me.
You recently had a guest on your podcast. I forget his name, but he mentioned, and I've heard this theory before. You have a jar, and I think it's like you have 960 marbles in it, and that's as many weekends as you get with your kid. I don't know if it's 960. I'm terrible at math, but that number came to mind. And you pull each week of your child's life, you pull one of those marbles out, and the marbles start to go down. It's this visual representation of the time that we have with our kids is kind of running out. And the point of that is to say, like you're saying, make the most of the time that you have. But when I heard that, I do a lot of work on the weekends. And
Mhm.
I know a lot of guys listening to this also work on the weekends. So that was a little, kind of frustrating, but I can't necessarily always dictate when I get to work and all that kind of stuff. So I also want to say, like you were saying, don't come home and spend 3 hours on Netflix. Try to take the time that you have every day. Plan big stuff on the weekend. Take a week off, go to the beach in the summer, whatever it is you want to do with your family, or just plan a fun trip to go see relatives, but just make sure you maximize the time that you have in any given day just to spend with your kids, and that's a real important message.
Yeah, and one of the things that guys can sometimes fall into the trap is that They think, oh, I'll just go hard for like a month or 2 months, and
Mm,
then we'll take a nice big family vacation to Disney.
sure.
We'll go to the
Sure.
amusement park, or
Yeah.
I'll buy them this big gift, and that will quote make up for it. It doesn't. It doesn't. You
Right.
have to be intentionally investing time in your children on a regular basis, daily basis. And one of the things that we do in our home to ensure that we are remaining consistent in that is that we have daddy and mommy time. I've talked about this a lot of times. And the kids know when their day is. We have 5 children, so it works out nice Monday through Friday.
Right.
Each
There you go.
the kids rotate, and I get one child, and it's like 20 minutes. We'll have a snack. We'll go for a hike, or we'll go for a bike ride, or we'll do different things. But it's just one-on-one time that's engaged with them, and that's one way in being intentional. And something I heard a long time ago that really struck with me is that we always talk about wanting quality time, but the catch is that what you think is quality time might not be quality time for the children.
Mm,
And
true.
in fact, it probably isn't for the most part. You never know what's going to be quality time for them. The only way you can guarantee quality time for your children is if you have quantities of time and experiences with them.
That kind of reminds me of one of the points that I wanted to bring up, and that is we don't need to let our job define who we are as fathers, and don't feel like we have to like kill ourselves providing for our family. I know there's a lot of people out there who will say, I am, football coach of such and such high school, or, I am the lead investigator for, such and such agency. And, that's who they are. When they puff out their chest, there's that badge or there's that whistle around their neck, and that's who they are. And a lot of times dads forget to be dads. And I could say that for a while there, I was the same way. I was, really into my job and doing what I was doing, and I was very driven. And there were times where I just wasn't always present at home. And not to say that I was, a terrible dad or anything, but I just don't feel like I was giving it my best effort.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I think the catch is that a lot of guys get their identity from what they do. I mean, if you think about it, most of the times when you meet a new guy, one of the first questions that you do to strike up the conversation, or one of the first questions you ask is, "So what do you do?"
Right.
And that's a lot of times how we gain our identity and our significance in the world is through what we do, what we accomplish, what we achieve, our successes, and lots of times that's attached to our performance in the workplace. And we have to remember that, again, that's not our primary role. That's not our primary responsibility. I mean, it is in a sense that we have to provide for our families,
Sure.
but our identity and our significance comes from the fact that we are made in the image of God. So we need to constantly put that before ourselves in our minds so that we don't feel like we have to continue to perform at the workplace and overwork. And a lot of guys struggle with being workaholics,
Hmm.
and they're sacrificing their family, really, to achieve in the workplace, and they don't even have to. I mean, their needs are more than met, and that's often the case, is that guys end up working more than they have to provide for their family, and it's lots of times to support some of the lifestyle that isn't necessary.
That's very true. Right before my son was born, I had a wise person in my life, and he told me, don't feel like you have to kill yourself to buy your kid 5 pairs of shoes because they can only wear one at a time anyway.
Yeah, that's so true. And oftentimes, you'll buy them this, especially when they're a little bit younger. You'll buy them some neat, elaborate play set or a toy or something like that, and 15 minutes later, they're playing with the box. Right?
Right. Yep. Yep. My son brought a collection into my office here yesterday. He's like, "Oh, this is my special collection of stuff," and I'm like, "Okay." And it was like bottle caps, a plastic dinosaur, and a marble. And
Yep.
he started telling me about all of it, but it was all things that had significance around an event, not because the item itself was worth something, but because he got that item. He got this bottle cap at the 4th of July when I let him have a sip of my Coke in a bottle, that sort of thing. And so he
Yeah.
kept those were what was important to him. I was like, oh man, that's really cool. It's not the big the big toy that's taking up half my living room right now. It's the stuff that's significant to you, and that's very very true.
Yeah, yeah. And this whole conversation we're having around providing for your family makes me think of one of the things that I wanted to bring up, which is as as men, we are called by God to lead our families. And that's a big term that encompasses a whole lot of things. But lots of times guys can become lazy, they can become passive, and they can just let their wives or the children's mothers, if there's
Hmm.
divorce or whatever, take over in a sense. And really the men are called by God to you're really called to do three basic things. One is lead your family, two is love your wife, and three is discipline and instruct your children and train them
Hmm.
basically. And that those aren't things that we should or can delegate to our wives, to churches, to coaches, to teachers, to schools, or anything like that. Yeah, I mean, you should go to church, and the kids should be involved in things there. But the primary discipleship of your children should be done by you. The primary training of your children should be done by you, and you as the father need to take the primary role as leader in your home. This doesn't mean that your wife doesn't have any responsibility or she
Right,
can't do
absolutely.
anything,
Yeah,
or and it doesn't mean that she has to ask for your permission for this or that. I mean, this is a whole deep conversation
it is.
that is beyond the scope of what we can handle
Right.
for what we're doing now. But I just I'm currently reading a book on fatherhood by John MacArthur, and it's just phenomenal. And I'm like 20 pages into it, but at the beginning, he really harps on how men are called to lead their families, and I think if more men led their families the way that the Bible indicates that we should, that a lot of the problems we see in society today would clean themselves up.
Right. And I've seen that backed up in the media talking about the absentee father and how that really does not help the family unit. And I know a lot of that is centered around crime research and things like that. But I also think it can be centered around who your kids are as people, where their morals are. As dads, we have a unique spot in the life of our children, and so does their mother. And we're not trying to say one is better than the other here, but
Right, right.
really, you're saying, as a dad, I am the one who's going to teach you these sets of things. Your mother can teach you these sets of things. And if you look at parenting as 50-50 you as a father, 50% your wife or your child's mother, half of that is going to be gone if you're not there, and
Mhm.
you've got to step up and lead. And there are some people who, leadership scares them, but you are in your family unit. You are with people that love you, people that you would sacrifice your life for, people that would
Yeah.
sacrifice for you. You don't need to be afraid of that responsibility. You can step into it, and you're not going to be perfect. I'm not a perfect dad. It's just something that we've got to remember. We will lead and we will grow into this, because I will tell you now, I've only been a dad for 6 years. I know that I'm going to grow as a father, and I'm sure you have grown since, as your kids have grown. You have a father. You as a father has grown as well, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. And you know what? You are the leader by default, and whether you choose to actively participate in leadership or not as a father, your wife and your children are going to look to you for that leadership.
Hmm.
And your example to them is going to be an example no matter if you're intentional about it or not. And
Right.
so do you want that to be a good example? Do you want it to be a bad example? And if you're not intentional, I think by default it tends to be a negative example. And then lots of times the wife loses respect for her husband because he's passive, and the children don't respect their father because he's not consistent, and he's not a man of his word. And I think those are some of the ways that fathers can make some tweaks to their lives in their leadership
Hmm.
really quickly, is to strive to be a man of your word and strive to be consistent in the things that matter most, like we were talking about with spending time with your children, and discipling them. All right, guys, I have a special favor to ask you. We're still trying to get to our 50 review mark in iTunes. So if you could hop on over to iTunes and leave a review, then take a screenshot of it and message it to me either on Facebook or Instagram and include your address. If you do that, as a special thank you to you, I'll send you a free Dad Hackers window decal. So remember, all you got to do is go to iTunes, leave a written review, screenshot it, and then shoot me a message on Facebook or Instagram and include your address. Now, I know on iTunes, once you enter your review, sometimes it takes a while for it to pop up. So you may have to like put the review in and then go back to iTunes a little bit later to be able to take the screenshot. All right, guys, back to our show.
And that reminds me, and talking about being a dad and talking about being a leader, there's a piece of advice that I have always kept with me throughout, my whole life. And sometimes I hate to say this, I forget that it actually came from the Bible. It comes from James. It says, "Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger."
Yep.
And that advice is really given to everybody. But I really feel like that really just hits me as a dad. You know, I hear my son, he does something, maybe he doesn't explain it very well, or he made a mistake, he broke something. And I just want to be real quick to step in and punish or step in to deliver some sort of judgment. And I really have got to remind myself, I got to step back. I got to listen to what he's really saying. What's the problem here? I've got to be slow to speak. I got to choose my words wisely so that I don't say something that I'm going to regret for the rest of my life. And I don't want to be angry at my kid all the time. I think anger has its place, and anger can be a
Mm-hmm.
good tool for learning if it is used properly. But if you just fly off the handle, if you just jump straight to anger, and that will happen, it's happened to me, it'll happen to everybody listening to this podcast. You just got to remember, take it easy and really step back and try to show some wisdom.
Yeah, I struggle with this as well. This be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger, scripture and whole concept. And it is super wise advice because I'll tell you what, I've failed miserably at this and I still do. And here's the not funny thing, ironic thing, sad thing is that your children pick up on it too.
Yeah.
Because now I see the effects of my example in my children, in how they relate to one another and how they relate to me sometimes and how they relate to their mother. We just have to really realize, and this goes back to my example or my point before, is that our example is an example no matter if we're intentional about it or not.
Very true.
And this is an area that I'm currently working on, because in my mind, there's a difference between reacting and responding. Reacting is when you
Absolutely.
don't think. Yeah, when you don't think and you just move forward with whatever you're going to think, say, or do. And responding implies that you've given it some forethought and you have almost like you have a plan in place. I think one of the things that helps me and can help a lot of people, and this is something that we've been working on with our children even, is developing a plan for situations that are going to come up. Like your kid's going to spill something, or your kid's going to do this or that, whatever in your family dynamic, it's probably going to happen again.
Yes.
So in your mind, you have to think or even write it down, like, okay, when this happens, what am I going to say to myself in my heart
Hmm.
so that I don't lose integrity, I don't lose composure, and so that I can go through that situation in an honorable way, and not lose my integrity.
Exactly. And you said it, and you said it time and again, is your kids are always watching. They're going to see you when you are at your best. They're going to see you when you're at your worst. And I know a lot of people are like, "Oh, I don't want my kid to see me fail." And you know what? Your kid needs to see you fail. Your kid needs to see how you handle adversity.
Right, right.
Because, like me, I always want my kid to have a happy life. I don't like it, like my son was sick last night and it made me feel really bad that he was sick. And there's nothing really I could do. His body just had to work through something. But, I just felt so bad. But he responded to it well because, maybe he's seen me sick. Maybe he's seen his mom sick. And he has to build a database to understand what do I do when I win? What do I do when I lose? How do I learn from it? And just being there as that example. And you got to understand your kids are going to learn. So make sure that they take away what you want them to take away.
Right. Right.
What's something else that you think that every dad listening to this needs to take into account?
Well, I kind of alluded to it earlier, and it's that being a family man, being a leader in your home, doesn't have to be hard or complicated.
No.
And what I mean by that is that you basically have three jobs. One is you're to lead your family. Two is to love your wife, and three is to discipline and instruct or train your children. Those are your three primary responsibilities as a man, as a husband, as a father, as a leader in your home. That's it. That's what God has called you to do. What we do is that, particularly in this information age when there's a bazillion podcasts, YouTube videos, blog posts and everything, books, television shows, whatever, you name it, there's so much information out there. A lot of it's conflicting about parenting and fatherhood,
Hmm.
that we have like information overload, and lots of times that it makes it more complicated than it has to be in our minds. And
Right.
then I know personally, if things become too complicated, it becomes very difficult to implement, and oftentimes it results in a shutdown. You know, um,
Yes.
so if you could just wrap your brain, if men could just wrap their brains around, you have three jobs. It's to lead your family, love your wife. And when I say love your wife, I'm talking about that self sacrificial love that expects nothing in return for what it does that Christ had for um, the lost, basically. That's how we're to love our wives and train our children in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. And that's it. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that. And I
Mm.
will say this, when we talk about training and instructing our children, lots of times we just focus on the punishment for the children or the consequences that they receive for poor behavior. But we need to back up and make sure that we are actively teaching, training, and practicing with our children correct behaviors, correct speech, correct
Mhm.
responses for certain things. Because I think what happens is lots of times we expect adult like behavior from our children, but we don't train them in the things that they need, and give them the tools, so to speak, to begin to acquire those adult behaviors. Because, like, your goal of parenting isn't to raise a child, it's to raise an adult that's ready to launch into the real world
Mhm.
and do work for God's kingdom. You know what I'm saying?
Right. And, that kind of leads me to the last thing that I wanted to talk about. And that was when our kids are watching us and we need to set examples for them and we need to train them. I feel that if we want our kids to be safe, if we want our kids to know the difference between right and wrong, we have to model that for them. And that's where I talk about having a secure mindset. You need to have it as an individual. You need to understand that, you know what, I am a man, I am responsible for my family, I'm responsible for protecting them. But I need to understand the threats that are to my family and violence that could be in my neighborhood or in my area. And when we can start to flip that switch to understand that, you know what, I can be a victim of a crime. I'm saying that as me, Andy Murphy, I can be the victim of a crime. um, when you get that, when you understand that, you will start to see, okay, now I know how to make safer decisions. And now I know where I need to be and when. Now I know that I need to avoid this side of town. If I get into a conflict with somebody standing in line at the movie theater, I need to be the one who takes the higher road here and avoids that conflict. And so when you do that as a dad, your family's going to see that. And you can take the opportunity. There was recently we were walking around my neighborhood. My son was on a scooter, and there's a guy in our neighborhood who I'm not quite sure if what's going on with him, but we will see him outside, and he's walking around. And while he's not saying anything, he appears to be talking to himself or to someone. Now, he's never been violent or never had anything to tell me that he is anything but a passive individual. But this guy is pretty big. He's much bigger than I am. And I know that he might be one of these people who doesn't realize how strong he is. So I kind of say to my son, it's like, this guy over here is not acting like everybody else. So we just need to watch him and let's stay out of his way. He could be a nice person, he could not. We don't know. So we need to make sure that we don't just run over and start talking to him. We might scare him. He may not know that we're here. So just take those situations and let your kids see you locking up the doors every night. Let you see them checking the windows and making sure that everything's okay, because they will take those lessons. And as soon as they leave the house, if it's at a 18, 20, 23, whatever it is, they will take those lessons with them and they will use them every day.
And I think that's a great thing. That's one of the things that I've been trying to do more is, when it's bedtime and you're tired, you don't feel like, doing a quick run around your house and making sure
Sure.
doors are locked. But
Hmm.
if you have that secure mindset, you're not being paranoid. You're just taking steps to ensure the safety and protection of your family,
Exactly.
which goes back to being a leader in your home. And it's these little things like make sure your doors are locked before you go to bed, make sure the windows are locked, make sure the lights are out, or whatever, these little
Hmm.
things, these little precautions when you're driving down the road, make sure the doors are locked in your vehicle. Um,
Yes.
don't leave anything out that people might desire in your car when you go into the
Right.
store,
Yep.
so that they're not tempted to break in. And like the guy you're talking about, you're not being judgmental in the
Hmm.
sense of like condemning the guy, but you're being cautious in teaching your child through the things that you're saying how to approach situations like that, where the guy might be completely innocent
Right.
but has some questionable behavior. So we're going to keep our distance and we're
Hmm.
just going to like keep an eye on that situation in case anything happens.
Right.
And when you're talking about the movie theater example, if you get into an altercation or something like that, that goes back to my point of right then and there is not the optimal time to come up with a plan for how you're going to handle that
There
situation.
you go. Yep.
You don't make plans of how to battle in the midst of a battle. You have to
Correct.
develop those plans beforehand. And
Yes.
so you need to think through these types of situations sometimes. And obviously you can't cover every situation that could come up, but if you have this mindset and this rationale and this thinking, you're going to be better prepared and better equipped for how to
Right.
handle.
And you explained so well the difference between react and respond. And that's something that I talk to. React is something your body just does. It's when you're sitting on your couch and you notice all of a sudden, oh my gosh, there's a spider. That's a reaction.
Right.
When somebody comes up and threatens you, you need to already say, okay, I need to respond by de escalating the situation and trying to move my family to the exit. If that doesn't work, then I have to be ready to take physical action to protect my family while they escape. That's some stuff that you can think about while you're sitting in the car on your commute. That's some things that you can think about, at night before you go to bed, pray about it, and just find that time to understand who you are as a man, who you are as a dad, and what you're willing to do for your family.
Exactly, man. Exactly. Well said.
Patrick, I appreciate your time. This has not only, I think, been a good conversation for us, I think this will be a good conversation for everybody who is listening.
Mhm.
Please tell us, where can we find out more about you and Dad Hackers?
Sure. And Andy, I just want to thank you for so much for considering me for this. When I received your request to do this, I was just honored and um, just so much appreciated the fact that you would think of me to do this with you.
Absolutely.
And it's been a great conversation. I really enjoy talking with you, and you have um, you've really impressed me with everything that you've done with the Secure Dad and how you conduct the whole thing that you're doing there is very, very professional, and I appreciate
Well, thank
um,
you.
the work that you're doing there. Okay, gentlemen, there's our conversation. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope it was a blessing to you and that you got something out of the different tips and advice that Andy and I shared. So I want you to head on over to dadhackers.us/062 to get the show notes. And while you're there, you'll find links for how to connect with the Secure Dad, as well as opportunities to connect more with the Dad Hackers community. And don't forget to shoot me those screenshots of your review from iTunes. All right, gentlemen, until next time, remember Proverbs 27:17. As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another.